One.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our second webinar brought to you by VBAExpress.com. This time it's on Excel's formulas and functions. Our presenter, the venerable Dennis Taylor, will take you through all of the, well, I shouldn't say all of the, but many of the powerful and potent functions that you can use in functions and formulas that you can use in your spreadsheets. During the webinar, feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions or comments. You can also use the question box over on the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll be monitoring those during the presentation. So if there are many prevailing questions, or if you have tips that you want to post in the chat box, I will break in and we'll talk about those. We'll spend a few seconds on them. So without further ado, take it away, Dennis.
All right, thank you, Jordan, and hello, everyone. I think there's no question that for many of you, writing formulas is what you do in Excel. It's the centerpiece of a lot of Excel users, a lot of their activities. And of course, how can we talk about formulas and not talk about functions? And they're related. If we focus just on functions, we could be here for days, weeks. There are over 400 of them in Excel. But certainly some of the really important ones are the if function. It's programming-like in nature. It opens the door to a different way of using Excel. And VLOOKUP, apparently the most frequently Googled function of them all, according to a lot of different sources. At least one Excel author said VLOOKUP is the most important function in Excel. We'll be covering both of those functions in depth. And depending upon time, we'll show you some rounding functions. We'll stress the importance of the COUNTIF and the related functions, including some new ones as of Excel 2007 that some people haven't discovered just yet. There are a few new ones also in Excel 2013 that we'll be discussing today. I will be using Excel 2013, and even if you're using Excel 2010, nearly everything we do is going to be the same, and Excel 2007 too. When we talk about functions and formulas, we're really talking about what's happening within the worksheet nearly all the time. We'll start off with a few tips and shortcuts here. And by the way, at different times I will be zooming in and out, and I think the best way to do this is to hold down the control key and move the mouse wheel. You know, you zoom in, you zoom out, and for different reasons. I do it often as I'm teaching to make things clearer on the screen or on the projection, or in this case in a webinar too. So I hope I don't do that too much. It shouldn't be too annoying, but it is handy, and it's a little bit easier than using that slider bar in the lower right-hand corner because the mouse can be anywhere. I'm going to go to a worksheet here called Find Formulas, and it's a mess. And actually, this is based on a real-life example, and I made it worse. The company shall remain nameless. But when confronted with a worksheet that you've been told perhaps is useful, but you can't figure out what's going on, your head's kind of swimming a little bit as you click here and you click there and say, is this a formula, is that a formula, and what's going on here? There are a couple great little shortcuts for assessing a worksheet. One of them is Control tilde. Now, tilde is a funny key, and that word isn't even that universally known. In cell C1 in this worksheet right here, I've depicted the symbol that's on a key, the two symbols that are on a key in the upper left corner of most US keyboards at least, above the tab key, below escape, to the left of number 1. Anyway, whatever you call that key, I'm going to call it tilde, but without using the shift key, but using the control key, look what happens when you press Control tilde. Watch the screen. All column widths have been doubled, but more significant is the idea that wherever there's a formula, you see the formula instead of the answer. Of course, we can zoom back and see we have a better sense of what's going on in the worksheet. Doesn't solve all of our problems. The reason the column widths are doubled is the idea that many times the formula is much wider, you could say, than the actual result. So it gives us a better opportunity to see the answer there. And it's what we call a toggle switch, Control tilde, right back to normal again. And this particular key, by the way, keystroke shortcut, is also represented in the ribbon menu system. On the Formulas tab in the ribbon, you do have a choice out here called Show Formulas. The pop-up tip below it does refer to the other symbol on the same key. And it's that other symbol that's so tiny. Some books refer to it as accent grave, the accent you see over the letter E in certain French words. So that's easily overlooked when you see the pop-up tip here. Anyway, it's a great tool, and either by way of this button, which that too, of course, is a toggle on-off, or Control tilde, whatever you want to call it, a great shortcut for beginning to assess what's going on in this worksheet. Another feature that's really handy too is the idea that you can highlight all the formula cells. On the Home tab in the ribbon, there's a choice way off to the right called Find and Select, and choose Formulas, and all formula cells are highlighted. It might not be a bad idea to make them yellow or green or blue if you wish, and then you have a clear image of where they are. It doesn't show you what the formulas are, but it shows you where they are. And one small point here, like certain features in Excel, if you had highlighted 3 or 4 or 6 cells or whatever and tried to use this feature, it would only search within the highlighted cells. Counterintuitively, if you click on one cell and say show formulas or formulas, it looks throughout the entire worksheet. So that's what you want to do, is click on one cell before using that feature. But that's really handy too. And although we don't necessarily want to go there, you could go a step further here at a later time perhaps, come back, do Find and Select, go to Special, and then this dialog box pops up. You could choose constants and then uncheck the box for text and logicals and errors, click OK, and now you've highlighted only the pure numbers, the actual number values in the worksheet. Those are not formulas, those are just numbers. So you might want to give those a different color if you wish. So that's going to be handy at different times. Now, sometimes when you're writing formulas, you recognize a parallel situation. In other words, possibly 2 sets of formulas we could take care of at the same time. So in certain worksheets, and a different worksheet here, I believe it's in this one here, got some data off to the right here, and I want to do some totals right here. And it occurs to me I also want to do some totals over there. So let's highlight them both. I think a lot of you know you can highlight non-contiguous ranges by using the Control key. So I've highlighted this data, I've let go of the left mouse button, hold down Control again as I highlight this data. And we can get this, we can get to this total in 2 ways. Auto Sum is available on the Home tab, it's also available on the Formulas tab, and you may also know a keystroke shortcut. It's Alt equal, Alt equal. And there it is. And that just fills in all of them at once. Now, not always do you want to do a sum though, so I'm going to back out of this by undoing it with Control Z. Suppose you just wanted to do, or suppose you wanted to do an average. We could highlight the cells. By the way, if you highlight this group first and then this group over here, it doesn't make any difference. The active cell is in a different place, but same idea. We've highlighted a bunch of cells. So, auto sum, there we go, or alt equal. Let me go back for a second there. Lost my train of thought. There's entirely something clicked. Let me hit the drop arrow here. The drop arrow for auto sum occurs in both of its locations. It's average. See it there. Now, one other variation on this. Suppose we wanted a median. I've got the cells highlighted. I'm going to type equal median. That's the middle value, of course. And then when it's an even number, it'll average the middle too. As I'm typing this, although I want to take care of this for all 10 cells down here, I'm typing equal median. Because the active cell is in K8, I'm going to select only these cells. And if I were to press enter, it would simply put the answer in the single cell, but I'll press Control Enter. So when we press Control Enter, the data goes in multiple cells. And you can see that at different times. Now, even if the data, and this would be a little bit strange, admittedly, but if this cluster of data here happened to be down here somewhere, and we wanted to do the same kind of thing, or over there, whatever, we could certainly do the same kind of thing. In other words, we could highlight these cells and these cells here. Maybe we'll get rid of the data right now, just there. But if I wanted to do a median, same thing would happen, or any other function too. If it's simply auto sum, we'll click auto sum. But any other function other than the ones we can get to from this drop arrow here, we'll simply use the text there. Equal median. And this time we'll highlight these cells right here. And Control Enter. And certainly when you're entering data at times too, if I wanted to put in these 2 cells here, and in this one, and in these 3 right here, you know, the number 10, I'll type 10, press Control Enter. So it's handy there too, outside of formulas too. Control Enter. If you're adding up data at situations like this, nearly everybody who's proficient in Excel uses auto sum. Here too, keystroke shortcut many times is likely to be faster. Alt equal, then enter. If you are using the actual symbol, the symbol itself, the AutoSum symbol, you can click it twice. A lot of people don't know that. Click it twice. hold on a second. One interesting change, this is in Excel 2013. When you click it twice, you have to kind of slow down a little bit to get to it. And I don't know why they've changed that a little bit. In older versions, a simple double click will do that. Now, another thought here, sometimes you'll highlight the data ahead of time. Press Auto Sum or press Alt Equal. You get the total there too. And then down here, if we wanted totals only on the right, we could highlight this, press Auto Sum or Alt Equal. It's going to work that way. Or if we only wanted totals here, highlight this, press Alt Equal or Auto Sum. And sure enough, you might have guessed this, if we highlight the data this way, press Auto Sum or Alt Equal, what's going to happen? There it is, that way. So we'll get totals on the bottom and on the right. Different approaches here to using Auto Sum. It's a real powerful tool. Keep in mind, too, that there might be times if you want to add data from, say, different multiple locations, and be kind of unorthodox here. Why don't we just type, for example, if I'm going to be adding up some data from this cluster of cells over here in rows 12, 13, 14, also the data up above here, and again, that would sound a little bit strange maybe, but I could start with Auto Sum rather than typing it, that's all. And okay, so I want to add up data from New York and Florida right here, comma, and then data over here from Europe. Admittedly strange, but the point is, and then maybe some data over here. In other words, by putting in, what we want to do each time, though, is put in a comma. So after we put in the data for one of these, maybe, delete that, highlight the data over here. Admittedly, they're looking a little strange in this situation, but every time we put in a comma, we can go highlight a different range. So even when you're using the sum function in unusual situations, why not start with Auto Sum? It just saves you some typing, too. Now, somewhat well known, but not always the shortcut is well known, is the idea that sometimes you need to have an absolute reference, and sometimes that's needed in multiple situations. In this worksheet here, let's imagine that we're going to put in a new compensation amount. You see the current compensation in column L. Everybody's going to get a 2.91% increase. I'm going to move this into column P for the simple reason that the formula, when we see it, if it refers to column P, it's a little bit easier to read and we won't get confused with the number 0 here. So, any number of different ways to write this formula. Certainly one common way would be to write equal L2 times this cell here plus the amount here. And other ways to do it, of course, we could put that in parentheses, we could do it with +1, we can certainly come up with an answer here. A lot of you know that if we start to drag this down the column, just a few cells, we see immediately, looks like there's only going to be one person happy with this pay raise. And so what we've done here, of course, is, although that says L2, refers to it twice in P1, in this cell, we're referring to L3, that's good, but P2, no, that's empty. And down here, P3, and so on. So I think a lot of you do know what to do, but what we do in this case here, we make the reference to P1 absolute. And it certainly is not an intuitive thing. You learn how to do it, it's easy, but we embed these dollar signs both in front of the P and in front of the 1. You can type them, but it's going to be easier to simply press F4. Now, if you were making the entry and you knew that ahead of time, as soon as you put in the P1, you might as well press F4. If you come back later and edit it, you can click in front of P1 or after it or in the middle, whatever. It doesn't make any difference where, just nearby, and you can make it be an absolute. And again, I stress, this is not an intuitive thing to do, but it does get the job done. And some people might mistakenly say, oh yeah, dollar signs because it's compensation, right? No, that's just the symbol that we use to mean if we copy this formula, this reference will not change. It's an absolute reference. Small tip here, I'm not going to press enter, I'm going to press control enter. If I press enter, the active cell will move down to the next cell. I want it to stay in place. And I'll check it out for 2 more cells again, just to be safe here. Looking good. What's this one look like? Looks like this. I want to copy this down the column. Copy paste would take forever. Dragging from the corner, if you pardon the pun, might take a while too. Maybe a real drag. Let's just double-click the lower right-hand corner. One of Excel's better shortcuts. Double-click the lower right-hand corner. What does this mean? Copy this formula downward. Excel looks at the data to the left and more or less follows it. I'm going to double-click. I think the first thought that would enter your mind after this is, how far did it get copied? Press Control period. Control period. Immediately that gets confirmed. You might want to scroll a little bit beyond that. You probably knew ahead of time how much data you had, but nevertheless this confirms it. Control period simply moves the active cell around the corners of a selected range. And although you didn't specifically, or I didn't specifically, select the range here, by double-clicking, the range got selected. Now, backtracking a little bit here and emphasizing this concept, I'm going to press Control-Z a few times and just go back here maybe. Back up here again. Here's the original formula. Click after the P1, F4, Control-Enter, double-click. Press Control period. There we go. We see it goes down to the bottom. A change in Excel 2010 and a good one. Before 2010, if one of the adjacent cells here in this column had been blank, double-clicking would have only copied the data down to here. In other words, let me just temporarily show you how it does work now. I'll move this over here temporarily and actually do an undo and move this out of the way. In this case, of course, it's going to ignore the blank cell and just zip right on past it, because the cell looks at the other data to the right. Of course, it doesn't fill in the amount, but it does move on downward. So that's an improvement too. At different times, you might have a situation where you need mixed references. Here's a small example here. If you look at the data here, or if you look at what the formula needs to be here, it's simply going to be 900 times 20, which is 20%, 180. We need to distribute these, though, across the other regions. If we write a formula here, and if we were thinking only as we're thinking based on the previous example here, we could easily make an adjustment here. Now, first of all, when we multiply this, it makes no difference which comes first. I think most of you know that. 3 times 2 is 2 times 3, so it's pretty apparent we can do it either way there. But as we look ahead here and think of other formulas, if we were to write them all manually, every formula needs to have a reference to row 3, because that's where the percents come from. And every formula needs to have a reference to column B. So column B and row 3 need to be in every formula. Just imagine for the moment you're thinking out here, a formula out here in cell F6 needs to get data from F3, that's the row 3, and also B6, that's B. So they all need a B, they all need a row 3. If you click the F4 key repeatedly, now right now the blinking cursor is behind the 4. If I click the F4 key repeatedly, you see how the dollar signs change. Now here too, it's not intuitive, but whatever follows the dollar sign will not change if we copy the formula. So we want the dollar sign in front of the B, not in front of the 4. And over in this part of the address over here, you can click anywhere over there, start pressing F4. Here we want the dollar sign in front of the 3, but not in front of the C. So in this case here, we'll complete the entry with Control-Enter, double-click to copy downward, and then drag across. And all these should work just fine now. All of these, pick one at random like this one, for example. It refers to row 3, it refers to column B. And you can easily figure out the answer there too. These are easy numbers to work with, of course. They're not always in real life, but nevertheless, a mixed reference. Not as frequently needed, but occasionally it's there. You can certainly type the dollar signs manually if you wish, but why not take advantage of this capability here too. Now, when you're writing certain formulas, if they deal with an entire column, let me come back here and recopy this. Suppose we want to know what the total compensation is here. I've got this set up to the right here. We want to add up the data in column M. Well, let's start with AutoSum. You can, again, click the button or click Alt equal, either way. Now, Excel makes a guess, in this case a bad guess. We want to add up the data in column M, but rather than highlighting M2 down to M700 or whatever, or typing it in, why not just click column M? Enter. We got it. Want to do an average? How about the drop arrow with AutoSum? Click it. Choose average. Do the same thing. Click column M. Enter. We got it. Median, you need to type it. As with any function, you don't need to capitalize it. Left parentheses, what do we do? Click column M. Do you have to put in the right parentheses? No. Excel will do that for you, provided you're only using a single function without nesting, or anytime you have multiple parentheses, you do have to type them all, except in a single case like this. So when you're using a function by itself, just press Enter. Excel will take care of it. Now, good cross-check on at least 2 of these. I click column M, I can certainly see the total in column in cell Q2 out here to the right, but also at the bottom of the screen. Down here in the status bar, there's that same total. The status bar down here is activated anytime you highlight 2 or more cells with values. If you right-click down here, you will see a cluster of check marks right in here. These are various statistical measures. These will always pop up anytime you highlight 2 or more cells. And of course, in this situation, it also, since we've selected the entire column, this gives us all these answers here. Now, certainly they're not all important all the time. Occasionally, I mean, I rarely need count or numerical count, but they're going to be handy from time to time, so maybe leave them all checked. I meant to point out here, too, another advantage of these formulas when you use entire columns is that if this list grows or shrinks, we don't have to rewrite these formulas. Now, of course, if your list has interim subtotals in it, all bets are off. Don't do this. It's not going to work properly. If you have a grand total at the bottom and nothing else, you could do this and divide it by 2 to make sure it's accurate. But in other respects, this is a great tool, and using these in other situations is going to make sense as well. And we'll see another example when we come up with VLOOKUP here too, also with these. Occasionally you might need these for rows, but not very often. In this worksheet here, I'll zoom in a bit. If I want to get an Eastern total, it's going to be the Boston, New York sheets there. I'll click on cell B17 first of all, Alt equal or auto sum, and now I'll simply drag across rows 4 and 5. That looks pretty funny, 4:5, it means rows 4 and 5. There it is, there's our answer. And a quick verification there, I'll drag across rows 4 and 5, look in the lower right-hand corner, the number is 125830, 1252830, that's it, same number we've got over here in B17. If we're doing the Midwest, I'll only do one more here. Yes?
So someone has asked, is there a danger of including unintended values by using an entire column? I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, let's say you know your data well enough. Let me jump back momentarily to this other example. Let's say we know our data to the extent that we've got nothing in column M except salaries and the text on top. You don't want to do it casually, and if you didn't know your data and if you haven't gone down to the bottom of it recently, or if other people might have been using it, did somebody put in a total down here? Did somebody put in some empty rows in it? I mean, let's say that that's sort of a given or a prerequisite for saying, yes, I'm confident this will work. You've made sure that there are no interventions, so to speak. There's no changes in the data. That's when it works smoothly. We're going to show some other examples of it too in different situations.
So the lesson is know your data, right?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Always a good takeaway.
Right, and think too of how much easier this is to read than if had I highlighted them, it would look like M2:M699. Now that's certainly not wrong. It's not difficult or anything, and people who work with Excel, they know what that means. But if the list grows, if you add 3 new records at the bottom, you're going to have to change this. If you delete some rows, you're going to have to change this too. Well, you don't really have to change it in theory. You could leave them because it'll be tabulating empty rows, but it's just easier and it's cleaner looking too, and it's going to simplify the look of certain formulas. So I think it's a great tool. Using with rows, admittedly, is a little strained maybe. I think this is an unusual case, but occasionally it might come up. Doing a Midwest total here, by the way, I'll simply do Alt equal, but this time I'll click row 7 for Chicago and then put in a comma and click row 12 for Cincinnati. That too looks kind of funny, doesn't it? 7:7, 12:12, but you see what it's about to do. You can tell by the highlighting. We'll press enter and we'll have those 2 totals. And again, we could verify that by clicking row 7 with the control key, clicking row 12. We see our total in the lower right-hand corner. It's 1478783, just like what we're seeing in cell B18. So these are different ways of thinking of the data. I think here maybe it's not quite as clean looking as the example was with columns. Now, let's imagine this worksheet here. This company has decided to give people a bonus based on their job rating. So we've got a column set up for this. The column doesn't have to be any wider than what we see, but in order to see what the if function is going to be doing here, I'm going to make this wider, substantially wider, and zoom in too. The if function, like I said earlier, is almost programming-like in nature. In English, we'll be saying the following. If your job rating is 4 or 5, you get $2,000. Otherwise, nothing. That's it. It's a cruel world out there. It's either or. The if function can be, not must be, but can be at times complex and unwieldy and lengthy. It also, many, many times, can be simple and straightforward. And it's just based on Boolean standard logic. Equal if, left parentheses. Below this it says logical test. What do you mean logical test? We can compare two different cells. What we're about to do is compare a cell with a value. We can compare a cell with a formula. We can compare different formulas, all kinds of variations on that theme. We're simply going to say, is this J2 here? And we can do this two ways. Is it greater than 3? All the job ratings are whole numbers. They're 1 through 5. So this means what? It means it's 4 or 5. Another way to say this, slightly longer, we put in the equal sign, but in this case we put in a 4. And we read this as greater than or equal to 4. So whatever is clear to you, either one. I'll just stick with this one for now. That's fine. That's one example of a logical test. Comma. We're going to provide two answers. When this is true, we said 2,000. Now the answer could be a formula. It could be a cell reference. In some cases, that's a better approach because then you've got the flexibility of changing the cell reference at a later time and having all the formulas immediately react. So sometimes a number, sometimes a cell reference, sometimes a formula. It could even be text. And the same is true of the other answer that we provide for when the value is false. If we want 0 here, we could certainly put in 0. If we want to display blank, we put in double quote, double quote. If we want to put in text, we can put it in between the double quotes. We probably wouldn't do this if we were HR professionals, so I won't do that. But you get the idea. We could do this. I'll put in the space. Do we have to type the right parent? Not really, not this time. Control-Enter, because I don't want the active cell to move downward. There it is, and you see what the answer is. Job rating was 3, no bonus there. I'll double-click the lower right-hand corner and redisplay the formula with function key F2. So there we are. We see what's happening. Pretty self-explanatory. When you look at the answers here, the logic is straightforward, it's simple, it's easy. And many, many times it is with an if function. And again, the column ultimately doesn't need to be that wide. But let's do expand it and take it in a slightly different direction. The company has decided, it's changed its mind a little bit and says, these people who get a job rating of 3, they deserve a bit of a bonus, maybe not as large, but they deserve a bonus too. So let's make a change here. Now, here's what's not so obvious. The logic actually happens left to right. When this is true, when that condition is true, the answer is 2,000, the logic stops. But if this condition is false, in other words, if the job rating is 1, 2, or 3, the logic jumps after the comma behind 2,000. And you could say it's waiting right here. So what has it been doing? It's simply been putting in a space. But what if we put in another if right now to see if this job rating equals 3? Now at this point, the only job ratings that could be encountered are 1s, 2s, and 3s. If the job rating is 4 or 5, the answer is 2,000. The logic doesn't even go here. So if the job rating equals 3, comma, we're going to give these people $750. Otherwise, comma, nothing. This is an if inside of an if. It's a nested if. We need another right parentheses out there. You can type it before or after this one, doesn't make any difference. There we go. So those must be typed. I'll press Control-Enter. All these will be done at once. I'll press F2 to redisplay it. And you can see what's happening. Every time we see a 3, we see a 750. Well, actually, we only see 1 on the screen right now, but there it is in row 7. So on. And again, at first, okay, you wouldn't know what to do exactly, but when you see it, it starts to make sense. We've got three possible answers now: 2,000 or 750 or blank. That's it. It's happening. And maybe we'll go a step further. You might question their wisdom to give any kind of a bonus to the people who have a job rating of 2, but maybe we'll give them a token $100, almost like shape up. So we could put in additional logic after the 750, another if. If this job rating equals 2, comma, we'll give you $100. Otherwise, comma, blank. Whoops, comma, there we go. And by the way, I pressed period there. It really helps when you're writing formulas like this. Zoom in. Make this large on your screen. Maybe not this large is necessary, but make sure it's clear. Commas and periods from time to time. Sometimes the other symbols kind of merge together there. Zoom in. Make it large and clear. Another closing paren out here. These are color-coded. You can probably see that too. Now this is an if inside of an if inside of an if. It actually is considered two nested ifs. Let me press Control-Enter here and redisplay it. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that a lot of people will need this, but on the other hand, you could, and you might see something like this. If the if function is brand new to you, it perhaps is a bit of a leap here to say, oh yeah, I understand that. That's easy. It's a slight glitch right now on the screen. I'm not sure what's going on. I might have to start Excel again here.
No problem. It happens. I think someone said that they've lost some audio. So has everyone lost audio? Can everyone hear me? Okay. People are confirming they can hear. You know, I was watching a webinar by the Excel Advise guys, and they were having all sorts of weird, funny issues with Excel and the interfacing, and kind of did what just happened here. So we'll get that back up in 1 second.
Are you able to see my screen now?
We see the GoToWebinar.
Okay, there should be a prompt coming up probably to ask me to take control. For the moment, I'm not seeing that.
Okay. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find you. Make sure that this goes right. There we go, Dennis. What we're going to do. Oh, there we are. You're back.
Okay, you can see my screen?
Everyone. Yep.
Okay, good. The file I'm opening is not the one that I was working with, but it's a copy, so it's the same thing. So we'll go back here, and I'll have to backtrack just a little bit, but not too much.
And can I throw in a question while we have a break?
Sure, absolutely.
We did have a question that I want to address. So someone has asked, can the if function return a range?
No, it can't, and it can't do formatting either. Although in combination with conditional formatting, you can make sure that certain results have colors associated with them, but no, it can't return a range.
Now, there is one function, I don't know if we'll go into it today, so maybe we can talk about it at the end. I know the choose function can actually return a range, so you know, if we have a minute at the end, I could go into that.
Yeah, I always sometimes mention choose in combination with VLOOKUP because it's got a self-contained table instead of an external table. All right, let me repeat sort of where I would go back just a few steps. We're using the if function here to point out that we could provide different bonuses for different levels of job ratings here. So if the job rating equals or is greater than 3, comma, we're going to give these people $2,000, comma. But if not, another if this job rating equals 3, comma, we want to give those people $750, comma, And earlier we'd stopped it right there by putting in double quote, double quote. That's what we display when the job rating is not a 3 and it wasn't a 4 or a 5 either. So 2 closing parentheses there, and double click. And we see those answers. But it was also in the process of extending this. I think at that point some of you lost it or lost the visual. So we can put in another if here. And I think we want to say carefully here, it's not a goal to have more ifs. I mean, we get into a certain stage here where maybe the only person that's understanding this is the person who wrote it. Sometimes these are jokingly referred to as job security formulas. But maybe the logic is needed here, and we need to come back and say again, if this job rating equals 2, comma, we'll give these people $100, and if not, blank. And it's an if inside of an if inside of an if, and we have to make sure all of our left and right parents match up. I'll press Control-Enter here and zoom in a bit so we can see this better, and also I'll press F2 so we can see that formula better right here. So I make this column a bit wider. There we go. Prior to Excel 2007, the most nested ifs you could have had was 7. Now this is only 2, so you can begin to imagine the complexity of what some of these might appear as. Again, I wouldn't hold this up as a goal, and I'm sure you kind of pat yourself on the back, and I got it. And again, sometimes talk yourself into situations, well, this is the only way to do it. But sometimes you will see if functions that get somewhat extended. As of 2007, the maximum number of ifs is now, believe it or not, 64. I can't imagine anything even coming close to this. Now, we could go on with this, and I could have another if too, but that's not the point. It just brings out some of the ideas here, some of the thought process. We now have the potential here. We've got 4 different answers, 2,000 or 750 or 100 or blank, and we see those represented on the screen in different places. But let's show another aspect of using the if function, and that's the idea that sometimes it's used in combination with the AND function or the OR function, both of which allow us to set up what might be called complex situations or complex logical tests. Now off to the left here, I'm scrolling to the left, I'd like to see the years in the status column, but not the benefits column, so I'm going to right-click on column I and simply hide that column. There we go. All right, the company has changed its mind again and says the following. We only give bonuses to full-time people, but they must have a good job rating. So taking out some of what we already have here in the structure here, I'm going to simplify it a bit. Sort of go back to where we started. And it's not totally there correct on the right just yet, but let's start with the word AND here. The AND function can be, or let's say it is, often a standalone function, but it can be used with the if function. The AND function consists of 2 or more conditions, all of which must be true for the entire function to be true. So we're trying to say 2 things here. Your job rating is bigger than 3, comma, and your status, that's in cell H2 for this person, equals double quote full-time. And you need to spell this the way you see it. The upper lowercase, strangely enough, is not critical. The space is, of course. Okay, so how do we read this? If your job rating is greater than 3 and your status equals full-time, comma, you get your $2,000, otherwise nothing. If one of those is true, that doesn't make it. It's got to be both. Now, first time I saw this, I thought, why isn't the word AND between the 2 conditions? And then I quickly realized that we can have many, many conditions between the parentheses here, within the parentheses. So you might have 3 or 4 or 5, any number, up to 31 different conditions here within an AND function. So repeating the word AND over and over between every condition would be somewhat cumbersome. So we read it as if every time we see the comma here that we read the word and then it starts to make a little bit more sense. So we actually, right now, we've got 4 possibilities. These are both true. It's true, false, or false, true, or false, false. But only when it's true, true will these people get the bonus. So I'll complete this with Control-Enter, double-click the lower right-hand corner, and press F2 to view that and see what's happening. So the only people who are getting the bonus are full-time and they have a good job rating. You can see certain other people there Person in row 10 is a good job rating but is hourly. Person in row 7 is full-time but doesn't have a good job rating, and so on. The word or has the same kind of meaning it has in English, and if we were to use or here, you might question their wisdom, but what are they doing? They're saying if either condition is true, and as I complete the entry here, see what's happening. Now, what did happen in this case? Go back for a second here. There we go. Strange on the display there. I'm not sure why that happened. Okay. You recopy it, redisplay it. There we go. Yep. So if either condition is true, and I think you can quickly see what's happening here. This is a reminder, too, when you are testing these, I mean, sometimes you're in a rush and you just don't have the time to spend with it, but if you can simplify your situations and work off very simple, small amounts of data, you can begin to test these. And they really, I mean, ultimately, we always fall back on the idea, this is just pure logic. It's an either-or situation in this case here. Now, taking this a step further, though, sometimes you will see ands and ors together. And here, too, I wouldn't necessarily say it's what you all need to know, but on the other hand, you might encounter this at different times. Once again, the company has changed its mind and says the following. We are going to give you a bonus for two major reasons, one of two major reasons. Either you've got a good job rating. If you got a good job rating, we give you the bonus. But if you don't, we will give you a bonus if you've got a combination of two other factors, two other criteria. And those two criteria are that you are full-time, comma, and that your years of service here is greater than 9. So that's an and inside of an or. And if it's suddenly thrown in your face without any context, it's like, whoa, what is going on here? But it ultimately does make sense. I'll complete this with Control-Enter, press F2, see what's happening here. So we can see different situations here. The person in row 7, for example, does not have a good job rating, but is full-time and has 12 years of service. So although this person here in row 7 fails the first criterion, he or she does meet the combination of the other two. And the more you look at this back and forth, the more it makes sense. And again, when it's your data and you're working with this, these fall into place perhaps more readily than you might think as you see some of these. But recognize the power here. And possibly there could be times when you're doing nesting and you've got ands and ors. So it's not to say that you're limited. Sometimes we'll do nesting the way we saw earlier with multiple ifs. Sometimes we'll see ands and ors, and sometimes we'll see them together. Now, if this is all we wanted to do with this, we would complete this, and of course, double-click the boundary between K and L. The column only needs to be that wide. Now, I want to show you a slight tip here. If you work or you encounter large formulas, in this worksheet earlier that we saw here, there's a formula in the upper left corner. We'll zoom in on it. And double-click. What a nightmare, what a mess. Now, we're not going to really pick it apart, but while editing this, what I'm going to do is click in front of the second if and press Alt-Enter. That introduces a line break, and I'll do that right here in front of the next if, and the next if, and all of them, ultimately even the first one. Now, I am not changing the function whatsoever, but it certainly is easier to read, and maybe it's one of those I'll go grab a cup of coffee or something else and sit down and figure this one out, or go to the whiteboard and kind of sketch it out and so on. Ultimately, this logic, by the way, could be improved. We're not going to worry about it. Notice the multiple ifs there. Those are 4 nested ifs. Notice the color coding on the parentheses. But it's easier to read, and you're much better prepared to tackle the logic of this and figure out whether it's right or not. By pressing Enter, we have not changed a thing in terms of the function. One thing that throws people a little bit, someone who didn't know that and clicks on the cell and say, that's weird, look up there, it says equal. If you double click, you'll see this, but some people don't necessarily do that instinctively, so it might look a little funny up there. You do have the option, by the way, of going up to the formula bar up here. Off to the right, you'll see a drop arrow, or you can press Control-Shift-U. That will expand the... now, they possibly changed that again. Okay. Yeah, they changed that in this version. That's now double underline. So I take that back. In Excel 2010 and Excel 2007, you could have pressed Control-Shift-U to make the formula bar taller up there. But you can drag its bottom edge if you wish. Okay. Main point, though, is let's hope you don't get you don't encounter one of these. If you do, the idea of pressing Alt-Enter for a line break is going to help. By the way, just a minor point here too. Alt-Enter is really handy in a different context. If you're putting in a salary, for example, or a heading, you want 2014 salary, but you want those in the same cell, just press Alt-Enter and then salary. We showed that in some tips webinars that you might have seen. So there we go. That's handy too. All right, let's go back to this other worksheet that where we calculated the bonuses. And let's imagine that what we want to do in this worksheet here, and we'll ignore the new comp. I'll actually just delete that column there. We don't really need it now. But we do want to come up with the tax rate for this data. Now, if you had not heard about certain kinds of functions, you might think, well, I know there's a table, there's a tax table off to the right here. What I'm going to do, a few things here, let me readjust the formula bar. And since we don't really need to see this data here, I'm going to hide these columns. I'll hide columns P and Q. That's good enough. Right-click and hide. Now, here's a tax table. And for the moment, not thinking of Excel, if you saw 51,570 and you saw a list like this and nobody told you how to read it or anything, based on perhaps the way we do other things, maybe doing your own income tax or looking at certain lists somewhere, I think what most people would come up with would be the idea that you have not reached 55,000 here. That's the next highest number. So the rate's going to be 7%. That's the logic that Excel will use if you use the function that we're about to talk about, VLOOKUP. Excel has two major lookup functions, VLOOKUP, V for vertical, HLOOKUP, H for horizontal. Let me zoom back a little bit. Off to the right, you'll see I've got two tables here. Now, the word table is used somewhat loosely, and I don't want you to in any way confuse it with a relatively new term in Excel called a table, which means a structured list with banded rows or columns. We're talking about here the term table in kind of a loose sense, just a selection of data. If you're setting up a table for lookup purposes, are you going to design a table that looks like this or like this? They're both viable. Odds are it's probably going to be this one. Table lookups nearly always, I shouldn't say always, let's say 85% of the time maybe, are going to be vertical tables. It just fits on the Excel screen better. Don't assume by these two examples that tables are only two columns or two rows. They can be bigger. And sometimes the table that you're using to look up data is in a different worksheet even. But let's focus on this idea that we need to come up with a tax rate for these entries here. Now, before we go on with VLOOKUP, we also need to state this fact. There are two major kinds of VLOOKUPs. Some are referred to as exact match. Possibly that's more important for you. An exact match means I'm looking up somebody's name or some text entry or an ID number, and it must match exactly a list or a table found somewhere else. What we're about to show here, the first example, is called an approximate match. None of these salaries here are going to be perfectly matched up. Now, theoretically, one of them could be exactly the same. That's okay, and we don't care, but none of the others do. So we're not looking for an exact match here. And we will contrast this kind of a VLOOKUP with another kind. In these situations, the table that we're using in its left column must be in ascending order. Otherwise, you will get answers, but some of them will be incorrect. VLOOKUP, by definition, will compare data with the left column of the table. It'll get its answers out of other columns. And in this case, there's only one other column, but in some cases more. So we're going to use a VLOOKUP right here. We'll do it, I'll show you two ways, and we will use a different way of referring to the table at a different time. VLOOKUP, left parentheses. What's the item we're looking up? It's L2, 51,000, comma. Where's this table? It's right over here. Let's go highlight these cells. Right here. Just do it that way, or there we are. Comma. which column has the answer? Well, literally it's column T, but it's the second column of the table, so we put in 2. This is not an exact match. We don't do anything else. Enter, Control Enter in this case. We've got an answer. That is correct. It's the same as 7%. I think most of us on the Home tab would immediately click the % button right here. That's it. If we're going to copy this down the column, this reference needs to be absolute. That's the table reference. If we don't touch this, the next cell down will read S3 colon T13, next one down S4, and so on. So we need to make that absolute. We'll press F4. The function looks a lot more complex. It isn't really, but those dollar signs in there just make it look like that. And the S's and the dollar signs sort of blur together sometimes too. So this is okay, and it certainly will work, but we need to do this before copying this. So I'll press Control Enter, double click the lower right hand corner, and once again I'll press Control period just to make sure it got copied to the bottom. And of course in these situations you want to check out a few of them. We're getting correct answers here. Here's a 70,000. Hasn't reached that level, the 75,000 level, therefore it's this level, it's 10%. Now, if these are out of sync, some of your answers will be incorrect, but not necessarily very many of them. It depends. If I change this 35,000 here to be 85,000, I didn't see any answers over there changing. But somewhere in the list, some of them would have. And I'm not going to go through them and prove that, but that's happened. So that's a little insidious at times. You've got to keep your eye on that. In this example here, I could just press Control Z. If I did farther down the screen, maybe some of these to the left will change. Control Z, I'll undo, take it back to the way it was. I didn't sense a change, but there probably was somewhere in there. Now, a different way to refer to these, and this goes back to something I'd said earlier, if we know that there's nothing else in column S and T, and we're going to make sure nothing else goes there, it's okay to have a label, that's not a problem. Instead of this, what if we put in column S and T? I'll just drag across it. That's a lot easier to read. And since this formula is only being copied downward, we don't even have to put in any dollar signs. I'll make a change here. Now before I copy it, I'm going to press Control tilde to show the two next to each other. I think you can see pretty clearly that the two, based on the two entries here, the first one here in cell M2 is certainly a lot easier to read than this one. A lot simpler. You might have to get used to it, but on the other hand, that doesn't take that long. So let me press Control tilde again to go back to a normal display. I'll double click the lower right hand corner. These are all going to work the same way. We'll get the same answers. And that's just a lot easier to read. So once again, using an entire column reference is going to make sense. By the way, in the results here, if you have a number that's higher than the highest entry here, it simply will revert to this. So any number over 95,000 is going to be 13%. If you started your table too soon, if you started here and you had a salary under 35,000, but your table didn't go below that, you would get an error. So you do have to cover the lowest amount. You don't necessarily cover the highest amount. So this is an example of an approximate match. And it isn't necessarily the most common. In fact, I think for some people it's not. So here's another worksheet here with a different kind of lookup. There's a table off to the left here. People have been given a rating, and we want to come up with a score. And George Babbitt here, who has a rating of fair, right now, based on the formula in cell F2, is coming up with a 50, and that's not right. So what's different here? First of all, let's make sure that what we do have is correct. VLOOKUP is saying we're going to take this cell E2, the word fair, compare with column AB. That's the same technique we just used in the previous example. We do want to get our answers out of the second column of that table over there, column B. But anytime you need an exact match with VLOOKUP, you must put in a fourth argument, comma, and look at the pop-up. True for approximate match. False for exact match. Is that obvious? Not even close. Intuitive? No way. False. Now, earlier in the approximate match, we could have put in true, but that's what's called the default, so it wasn't necessary. We could have put it in. Now, think about it a little bit. Does true in your mind say, gee, that means approximate, false means exact? I mean, they had to do something, so they used these two words. Now, you can use false, and you can click it and tab it into place. This means exact match. Again, why? Well, that's the way it's done. Lousy answer, but that's the way it's done. we will get the correct answer. It's 71. Now, as an alternative here, and I think better, 0. Now, certainly it's not a whole lot more, well, it's not even any more logical, is it? But false seems to suggest maybe something failed or didn't work or didn't match or whatever. Put in 0. It's shorter. And furthermore, as we'll see, it's also the indicator that we use in the match function for an exact match. So we'll complete that and double-click to copy this down the column. And those are all correct, as we see. Every one of those entries in column E matches up with one of the entries over there in column A. You can see that clearly. But sometimes things happen. Somebody said somebody else didn't see the list properly or mistook it or saw an older version of it or something. Kit Carson, your performance was lousy. Misspelled lousy too. Anyway, even though I had spelled it correctly, that's not in the list. So what's Excel supposed to do? An NA. This doesn't happen with approximate matches because numbers fall between numbers. Anytime it's text, it must be an exact match kind of VLOOKUP. Anytime it's an ID number, it must be an exact match. And so maybe for a lot of people, this is going to be more common. You got to have the fourth argument, false or 0, false or 0, to make sure this works as an exact match. And if you've got a trailing space here, I'm putting it in behind fair, that's not working. Multiple spaces here between very and good down here, that's not going to work. A leading space here, that's not going to work. A workaround, short of fixing column E, is use the function called trim. Trim gets rid of leading spaces, it gets rid of trailing spaces, it even takes multiple consecutive interspaces and reduces them to 1. Trim will take care of all three issues here. That's the trailing space it took care of, and as I copy this downward, here it takes care of the leading spaces, and down here it takes care of the multiple consecutive interspaces. In other words, it takes this version right here. And by the way, you can highlight these while working with functions when you're editing. I'll press F9 to show you the real answer or the real result of trim E11. V-E-R-Y space G-O-O-D. Notice that it really has multiple spaces there. So you can intervene, press escape and move on there. But this is not going to work at all because it's just not in the list. This is an example of an exact match. Sometimes these are needed. And again, stress strongly. Social Security numbers, they got to be exact match. Close enough is not good enough. There will be times when VLOOKUP doesn't quite do everything you need, and you might have to expand into another function or set of functions. I've got a list here. Imagine these possibly on a different worksheet, and we can't change the order of them because other formulas work off of them, and it's protected data and so on. On another sheet, or in this case right here, I've got Social Security number. I'm trying to find out, first of all, whether it even exists in column C. So sometimes you say, I've got a list here, and I've got a name somewhere else, or an ID, or something. You just simply are asking yourself, does this exist? Let me zoom in on this a little bit, and actually I'll move it over too, so get more room. Does this exist? The function we want to use here is match, equal match. What is it we're trying to find? It's this right here, comma. Where are we looking? We're looking in column C. There it is, comma. 0 means exact match. 1 is the value that's less than but closest to. -1 greater than but closest to. We want exact match. 0. That's why I use it with VLOOKUP too. It's exact match in both cases. If this is found, we find where it is in column C. 16th position, that means the 16th row. See it right down there. It's Terry Malloy. The match function says, I'm looking in column C trying to find this E2 entry, that 11758, etc. 0 means exact match. We found it. Now, sometimes that's all you want to do. If you'd like to display a different answer here, you could do something like this. You could say, or maybe you didn't find it. Let's first of all show what happens there. What if the number ends in, I'll change this to the last number. What happens? We don't find it. It's an NA. Sometimes you might want to say, if this works, fine, but if it doesn't, I want to know. So you could say, if error. if that's going to cause an error, comma, display, anything you want within double quotes, not found. Something like that, maybe. Anything you wish, of course. You could do that. Now, if it is found, if I change this back to a 2, it'll simply display the answer. So you could do that. And there are other techniques, too, for working with this. But let's go back a little bit and say, ultimately, what we might have wanted to do here, and I'll just press Control-Z a couple times. Ultimately, what we want to do is to find out the name of this person. Now, a separate function, and often used in its own right and by itself, is called index. The index function begins with the idea there's a table somewhere, a table of data in a loose sense, a selection of data. The term here we see array. We've got some data over in columns A, B, and C. With the index function, you pull out data based on a row and a column reference. The row that we want is 16. Now I could type in a 16 right now. Let's use the answer that we got from the match function. That's the row we need to get the data out of. Which column has the data that we need? It's the first column. That's column A. And we can actually click it this way. I just put in 1. There we go. And there's our answers, Terry Malloy. Now, these functions might both be new to you, so this might be a bit of a stretch, but if I double-click up here and copy this, Control-C, Escape, come back in here, what if I paste it right in here? Control-V. So what this is, in effect, is really a leftward VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP can't look leftward, but that's exactly what we're doing here. Now, a lot of you might be saying, well, why didn't you just move the columns over? Well, let's say this data is rigid, and there's 75 other formulas in this worksheet that depend upon this layout. You can't go worrying about changing all those. Or maybe the data is protected, you can't even change the content. It's like cast in stone. So, it's not always to say that you need match and index together. Any larger Excel book that covers functions and formulas usually brings these two together at some point, although certainly they have their independent uses, as we saw match earlier. But index sometimes is going to be used alone. Now, we can simplify this too. At the moment we really need to find the name, we're using the index function, and we really only need at that point to look into column A. So let's make that be column A. The row number is going to be the same. It's going to be row 16, but because we're only looking in a single column range here, we don't need that column reference at the end, so we get rid of that. So it'll be slightly simpler here, and this is going to work also. So keep an eye on index and match. Not everybody will need them, but if you work with VLOOKUPs and occasionally hit some brick walls, or you can't quite figure out what to go with, you might need the match and possibly the combination of match and index. Now,
so Dennis, I just wanted
yes.
to say that I think many of our listeners are going to feel validated that you brought that up, because I think we had several people in the questions bring up that they actually prefer index and match over VLOOKUP.
Yeah, and if you are familiar, we don't have the time to go into array formulas, but if you're encountering certain kinds of lists in Excel, there could be situations too where you need a combination of array formulas and match and index to do some pretty cool things, let's say, that you can't do otherwise. I don't want to exactly go here, but if you had a list here, imagine this on a different worksheet or maybe off to the side, a huge list and another huge list over here, and you're trying to come up with someone's ID, how would you come up with Juan Garcia, comma space Juan over here, and over here it's this way. You know, pulling these together is the stuff almost of a separate webinar where we talk about array formulas and then putting them together along with index and match. VLOOKUP is not going to cut it here, but index and match in an array formula layout will get the job done. Over here, it would be a little bit simpler, but it would involve pulling the names together to make them look like these. Here you could use a VLOOKUP, but these things get really tricky and involved at times. And it seems as if everybody seems to be trying to match up lists at different times, big, small, whatever, in different worksheets. I should have pointed out here too, also at any given time, you can certainly jump around between different worksheets. That's not certainly not a goal or anything, but earlier when we were looking at these examples over here with the where we were doing the lookups, if we're on a completely different worksheet here, and I just happen to have the word good, now this is a little bit, suppose I'm out here, and here's the word good. What's the rating for good? So I simply want to look that up. Equal VLOOKUP, left parent, click on good, comma, and now how do I get to that table? I'll go down to the bottom of the screen. It's on the sheet called Lookup Choose. I click it. I drag across columns A and B, comma, 2, because I want the answers out of the second column, comma, 0, I want exact match, enter. So there's 85. Now, we usually don't do it that way, but, here it is. And as I wrote this formula, I didn't type, and I never type sheet names, except when I'm creating them or renaming them. I clicked on the other sheet and highlighted the relevant data and completed the rest of the function by typing it. So it looks like that. And many, many times when you're matching up tables, you're trying to do VLOOKUPs and matches and so on, you are working from different worksheets back and forth. I'd say, if possible, get them on the same sheet. It just makes life simpler and easier, and you don't have the longer sheet name references and so on. But you can certainly do that too. Okay, one category of functions here I want to bring out, and it's something that they've been around for a while, and I think a lot of you, or some of you certainly are familiar with some of them, but a few here, I want to bring out some new aspects of them too. In this worksheet here, this is an HR kind of worksheet that we saw earlier. We've got a bunch of people, we've got the list here. We've got a lot of full-time people, contract people, but certainly the question comes up at different times. Excuse me for zipping around here a bit too erratically. Column H, status, and somebody says, well, how many full-time people do we have? Now, conveniently off to the right, I have the entry full-time here so we can see it. But what's the function here? COUNTIF. Left parent. Where are we looking? Once again, column reference. We're looking in column H. Makes no difference what's in column H other than we know our data is there. There could be other things here. We don't care. We're simply looking to see how often full-time appears here. Now we can type double quote, full, space, time, double quote, or simply click on this cell to the right and enter. Control enter. I'll double click and we'll get our counts for the others as well too. So zooming in a little bit, and maybe even hiding some of this other stuff to make it even larger and clearer and so on. So there we go. Simple, straightforward. And again, you don't always have the adjacent cell to refer to, but you can certainly do this within double quotes. And a quick check here, I highlight these. At the bottom it says there are 698. If I click column H, it says what? There's 699 cells with data. Of course, it's counting the label too. So a difference of 1, and that makes sense. These were introduced in 2007. I'm sorry, these were introduced in Excel 97. COUNTIF. There's also a SUMIF. Finally, there's an AVERAGEIF. AVERAGEIF and SUMIF are both similar. They allow us, as you might expect here, to go a step further. AVERAGEIF says, I'm looking somewhere for people, for example, who are full-time, comma, but when I find them, let's go into column J and get the compensation amount. So let's find the average salary, the average compensation of the full-time people. There it is. Obviously it needs to be formatted, and we'll double-click to copy that down there, and there we go. So AVERAGEIF. It goes a step further. It's 3 arguments. SUMIF does the same thing, of course it adds them. Now, 3 new functions, 3 additional new functions in 2007. AVERAGEIF was introduced in 2007, but also we now have a COUNTIFs, plural, SUMIFs, and AVERAGEIFs. Now we can have multiple criteria. For example, somebody says, I want to know the average salary of our full-time people who have a job rating of 5. So it's AVERAGEIFs, with an S there. And here, oddly enough, we begin with what it is we're trying to tabulate, the compensation. So we put in the column J reference first, comma, and now we will have pairs of criteria. The first one, for example, might be full-time. The next one might be job rating, that's column K, comma, 5. So that says job rating's got to be 5, status has to be full-time, and we're going to average their salaries. There we are. And double-click to do the others too. And by the way, when you're using these various structures here too, you can use other kinds of logic. So what if we said the 4s and the 5s? You don't have to put this in twice, and actually that wouldn't work anyway. You have to put in double quote, either greater than 3 or greater than or equal to 4. So double quote greater than 3, double quote. So now we're about to see the average salaries of the various statuses over there for all the people who have a job rating of 4 or 5. There we go. So we're seeing those too. So these are good tabulation type functions to use, and when you're working with large lists, sometimes these are really valuable.
Now, Dennis, I want to, so sorry to cut in. I know that we got stopped for part of the way, but we have a timer duration on this, so I don't want to lose some of the question and answer time.
Okay, I think that's probably good enough. I know, again, we did have that interruption, but yes, if we have some questions particularly, let's turn it over to the audience for some questions.
Sure. So one of the questions that was asked, and I provided probably not the best answer, was that can you do an if function that tests if something is inside of a range? So in this case, they want to know if there's something in this range, do this, and if not, you know, take the opposite.
Well, okay. Let's see if I can come up with a quick example here.
What I had suggested was to use the match by if error, and then you would test.
Well, what if I'm going to copy a cluster of these. I'm dragging this out with the control key here, and putting it right over here for the moment. In other words, we're trying to say, well, possibly do it this way. I'm looking to see in this list here if intern appears. Now, obviously it doesn't. 0, or in other words, it appears 0 times. Does hourly appear? Notice I didn't capitalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it appears. I didn't capitalize it, but it's still, yeah, it found it. It appears once. I mean, now that might or might not be what you want to do, but you can see how that works. So now if I make this full time, or that appeared 5 times. So that's certainly one way to get there.
Right. So, and then what a user would do. So my match was probably more complicated. A user would test if that COUNTIF value is greater than. So what it returns, they would test if it's greater than 0.
Right.
If it's greater than 0, you would do something that was true. If it was, you know, equal to 0, you would do something that would follow the false.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, another question that was asked is if you could go over the average ifs function again.
Yeah, we just did it right here. Average ifs, like what I almost want to do is put a big gap right here, and maybe another gap here, and but of course we don't write the functions that way. Average ifs begins, let me scroll to the left a little bit, with the idea I want to average something. In this case, the compensation amounts in column J. But I only want to do that for records that meet certain criteria. And we can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 31, I think it is altogether. They appear in pairs. In other words, in column H, it's got to be full-time. In column K, it's got to be greater than 3. When all those conditions are true, we are going to average the salaries. In other words, the corresponding data in column J. That's what we do. We could have another criterion out there. I'll throw in another one here, but again, we got to get rid of these spaces here. So we've got 2 criteria pair right now. Let's add a third. And that is that the years of service, that's column G, pick the column G entry, is greater than 9. I'm sorry, comma, and then double quote, greater than 9, double quote. Now, I could potentially verify that by doing a filter and showing only the full-time people and also those who have a job rating of 4 and 5 and who have years over 9 and probably verify that. But I'm saying with confidence this is a correct answer. And so average ifs begins with what it is you're trying to tabulate and then these other references. Now, I use column, and I've stressed earlier on, I think using column references is a great tool. But on the other hand, when you're looking at data in different ranges, you might have to use the actual addresses, or if there's data below this. So it's not uncommon. Now it's going to make the function a lot longer looking, but if I put in J2 and H2, these have to be parallel if we're going to get reasonable answers. And then after the other one's going to be I think it's 699. I'll adjust that if necessary. So same answer, but wow. When we're not using column references, let me make sure that's the total. I think it was at the bottom. Yeah, we're at 699. So that's how it would look. And that's why, again, I stress using column references where it's sensible. Are there other questions?
I think someone is wondering about the availability to use formulas in a pivot report.
You can use them. You can insert a calculated field. I tend to steer people away from them because they become a bit unwieldy. But yeah, you can use them. I sometimes find that people are using them when they could have done that with the original data too. But again, yes, I don't have a good example handy right now, but you can certainly use them.
Right. I think that's the general consensus. It is kind of funny that Excel has these formula reports that you can make ad hoc, or it has their pivot table reports. But I think that is the general idea. And also, just to make note, because someone has said in our questions that there are some dangers with using the full column name, so column C. If you have a date in your header, Excel is going to treat this as a number. So.
Oh yeah, it will.
And with any of these, there's always sort of
sure,
between
yeah,
what you want to do. Formula readability, I think, is important, but always there's a balance in that case.
It's unlikely that the date comprises the entire header, though, and that's where you have a problem. If the date's in a header along with other text, it's not going to be a problem. So another issue.
I'm getting a few more questions. One gentleman has asked if it's possible to cover the is error function. I know you covered if error, which my take, if I could give my 2 cents on that, is that I always use if error now because is error is one extra step in between, but it is something to know.
That's right, and it has one advantage too. Let me see if I can go backtrack here a little bit too on the list here. Earlier here we used the if error function, but suppose you want to provide 2 answers. In other words, what I did earlier here was to say, let's see if I can repeat it here. If that is an error, comma, let's just display not found. I'll just put an NF to make it a little bit faster here. Okay. That's what we're going to do. Otherwise, do the function. Okay. And if that's a 1, of course, get that. It'll look funny now, but anyway, that works. NF. Okay. But what if you said, what I really want to do here, I want to say found or not found. So here's a new feature in Excel 2013 we can use too. We can display the formula text to the right. Equals F, and there it is. Oh, got to put in the O to get there we go. Formula text. I'll just tab that in. So that displays the formula. Let's put in this though.
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's handy.
Excellent.
So if is error, and oops, you know what? I'll make this a little bit faster too by copying this part of it. I'm going to highlight that, Control C, and escape and get out of here. Equal if is error. If that is in error, comma, display not found. But if it is, display found. In other words, I don't care what the number is, just tell me that you found it. See, we can't do this with if error, but now we can. So this is going to, and oops, what did I do there?
You have to have one last parenthesis at the end of the match. So you see the purple parenthesis at the end of the match. You just need to close off the is error. Now our timer says we have 18 seconds left. I don't know what happens when that timer runs out.
Okay. I'm looking at this in the face and I'm getting it wrong for some reason here.
See the purple right paren of the match?
Oh yeah,
right
there you go.
There you need an extra parenthesis. So there you go.
And I put an extra at the bottom. Okay, there you go.
Now, I guess is everyone still on with us? It looks like we are. So the timer doesn't make a difference. Okay, we just learned that about the GoToWebinar. So thanks for sticking around as well.
doing these on the fly, sometimes you get some funny results.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, crazy stuff here. So I was trying to make this work properly. I think, am I right? No? Yeah. Okay. So
yeah,
now it's, so there we go. And let me do the same thing here. I'll just drag this downward, and then there we go. So, but the advantage of the second one, even though it's longer, is that you can come up with two possible answers. The first one up here simply is going to give you the answer, or it's going to say not found. If I make that look right there. There we go. So yeah, that's the difference. And many times though, if error is cleaner, because you don't want to. Until that was introduced in Excel 2007, with certain formulas, when you wanted to give the answer, but at other times you didn't want to display a bunch of pound signs and freak out your audience, you want to display a double quote or something, but you had to have a long construction like this one rather than the shorter one up there. So, I might want to point out here too a function new in Excel 2010 that I found to be really important at times, and it's overlooked, and because it's got a funny name maybe, and because if you ever went to the Formulas tab and said, gee, I wonder what aggregate does. What does aggregate do? What's the pop-up? It returns an aggregate. Well, we knew that all along, right? What a lousy definition. But anyway, we're trying to add up a bunch of data here in column B, and it doesn't work because we got some errors in there. So the workaround is this new function, which is great, and it lets you work around different situations too. It's aggregate, and as soon as you see it, you can tab it into place. But it begins, oddly enough, with what it is you're trying to do, and you got 19 choices here. And these match up with some of the choices, with the choices you see on the subtotal function, which you might not be familiar with. So if we want to do a total, we put in a 9 here. So we want to average or total some data here, comma. But here's where it gets interesting. We've got 8 choices here. Let's say in some cases you want to ignore hidden rows, but in this case we got errors here. Let's ignore the error values. One of the options is ignore error values in hidden rows. We want to ignore the error values. That's option 6. Pop that into place, comma. And what are we trying to add up? Once again, I'll click column B here and enter. Now we've got our total. It ignores these. Doesn't block us the way a simple sum would. And the same thing is going to be true over here with all these here, an average or a max or a min in all these cases, because when you put this function in, equal AG here, aggregate, etc., that first list of choices, max is in there, min is in there, median is in there too, and some others, percentile, quartile, and so on. So this is a good workaround if you've got errors in a list, and obviously long-term solution is clean up your data, but you can't always do that fast. And say, tell me what is good, add that up, so on.
So We have another question. Someone asked, can we use VLOOKUP between two spreadsheet files?
Absolutely. Oh, yes. Yeah, you can do that.
You can. I will say, though,
Oh.
linking to spreadsheet files is often a recipe for disaster. Sometimes you can't get around
Absolutely.
it.
I agree wholeheartedly. I always, as much as possible, steer people away from that. Oh, yeah. They do work, and sometimes maybe you think they're, it's got to be, well, okay, but yeah.
They work until they don't, right? Until the whole thing crashes,
Yeah.
and then suddenly it says, would you like to, try to save this worksheet? So that's why I would suggest not to do it. If you are able to put the data into the new file, that's the best way to do it. I think it's beyond the scope of this workshop, but there are ways to connect spreadsheets various ways. VBA, I think there's other.
Well, also, if you open two files and display them together on the screen, you can certainly drag sheets from one to another, or
right.
control drag them too, to copy them too, and that works fairly easily.
Sorry, I didn't mean. So I have another question. This is a really good one. So someone works in supply chain and they need to analyze how much inventory that they have. Which function would be ideal to help them figure out if they have 1,000 units of something, and if that would cover them till, I guess they're looking to see if they have 1,000 units because that would cover them till a certain point in time in the future. So I think, and you can correct me if I'm butchering your question. So which function would be ideal to help this person figure out if they have 1,000 units of something?
Well, let's see. Possible. Let's do this. I'm trying to work off some existing data that will make it a little bit faster. Column G here has years. I mean, do we have over? I can click column G.
Status would work because you have several full-time hourly. I mean, it's just the nature of repeating data. So
well, remember earlier we did a count it to see how many full-time people we had.
Right.
But in this case, the person wants to know if that value has reached a certain amount. I mean, we can certainly say equal if or equal count it, or well, no, equal if. If we count column H to see how many full-time people we have there. If that is greater than 200, let's say our visual displayed answer is going to be over 200. Otherwise, double quote, 200 or fewer. So that tells us we've got more than 200. Now, of course, we could, make the 200 refer to a cell somewhere, or change the number. Is it over 300? Well, we change this to 300. I mean, something along these lines, could work. I'm not sure if this is getting quite to the issue, but
so there is a clarification. She is looking for, so she says, I have a spreadsheet, and each column is a week that has a demand value. I want to see, I have 1,000 units, and then return back until what point in time I'm covered until. So are you saying you want to count down? I think actually, I think I may even be able to give you the mic if you have a mic and want to ask your question. So I think you're asking, how can you tell and how can you count down that value given your weekly demands, and then return, because every week has a demand. So return the last week in which you've consumed 1,000.
In other words, you might want to do a VLOOKUP and look through a list to see.
Well, I think she's saying that you have 1,000. Okay, so she's saying you have 1,000 you can spend, and every week it's going to decrement a certain amount. So when is the date? If each week is a date, how do you find that out? Now I have an
You know,
idea of how to do that.
I think we'd have to see that data on the screen for me to work with it to give a sensible answer.
Let me see if I can adjust something here, and we can. You don't mind if I change my presentation, do you?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so let me see what we can do here. Okay, so we're going to show. Let me show my second screen. Okay, let me move this out of the way. Everyone see my screen? We're good?
Except me. I can't see it.
You not see it?
No. Let me see. Let me see. No, I don't think so. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay, so the question is that we have several weeks, and here.
But don't type that. Yeah.
I'm going to make this a lot faster, and sorry if I go too fast. Okay, so I'm just going to do that.
Yeah.
And here I'm going to say week, and we'll use the.
Yep, that's good.
And I'm just going to drag that across. Okay, so the question before us is, how do we tell when we're out? Because we have 1,000 units. So how many units? So I'm going to just double-click this. We'll say, or make it easy and do 100. So in week 1 we used 50. Week 2 we used 40. Week 11 we used 10. And then I assume that there actually is still data trailing here.
Okay.
So what we need to do is keep an aggregate count of how much we're using. So the one way to do this is I can say this is going to equal 50 because I know that's my demand. And then here I can say that this cell is always going to be equal to this plus this. So in that case, if I just drag across, we see that at a certain point it's going to equal 100.
Right.
And then finally there, and I know I'm going through this really quickly, we can just use a match. So here we're matching, we're trying to match 100 in this range.
Yeah, in this case it's not going to be an exact match. Yeah, right.
Right, so yeah, right. So I always just by default hit exact match, I'm the worst. So okay, so that tells us that we're in 3, and then following this idea of using index, we can actually just push this back. So here is the range I want to find where I've made that match, and then I've given it this number 3, right? So we know it left at 3, and I can enter, and I find out that it's at week 3. And of course, you know, we can do this for any amount of numbers. So here I'm going to change it to 200. I'm wondering if okay. So it looks like because I never grow up to 200.
Right. That's correct. Yeah.
So the real question is, so let's say I have 131. Okay, so in this case, I was looking to match. To make an exact match, and what you were saying was that I'm already making this more complicated than this. So
that 0 at the end might have been a -1 instead of a 0.
So let's try that.
I think. And every time I try that, I get it wrong. If it's not -1, it's +1. But anyway. That might...
Right, so I'm making this harder than it needs to be, but there is a way to fix that. But on the spot, I'm just probably going to do a lot of wrong things until I get it right. So that is how I would do it. And if you have a minute, Dennis, I really love the choose.
Let me see. I've got an example of that. Let's see here if I can come up with it reasonably fast.
And I'm giving you, sorry, let me give you the presentation again. Oh, you're back. Great.
Let's see here. Okay, this is interesting. Different approach between a mathematician and the rest of us. Now, I don't mean to start a fight with anybody, and I love math myself. I'm not a mathematician, but here's a thought. Sorry for the bouncing around here. We got some dates here in column H, and we want to know what quarter it is. So why does it keep jumping that way? This doesn't usually do this. Okay. So there's a formula right here that a mathematician would probably come up with. that tell you what quarter that is. And the answer is correct. And you copy down the column. Those are all the correct quarters, chronological quarters, for the dates we see to the left. But a better way, I think, for a lot of people would be to use the choose function. To say, okay, if we know the month of here, we'll be all set. And here's a function called month. You might have seen it. It simply extracts the month from a date. If we extract the month from here, it's going to be a 9. So the month of that is going to be 9. Now, if it were a 1, we're talking January, so the answer would be 1, first quarter. If it's February, it's also in first quarter. That's a 1, and March, and then 3 2s, 3 3s. Whoops. And right parent. So what we got here are 12 separate answers, because this answer here is 1 through 12. So here are the 12 answers. So what's the answer going to be there? It's 9. So September, the 9th of these entries here, that's third quarter. So there it is. So we're going to get the same answers here as we got over there. And yet, let me bounce down here. On both of these, I'll use formula text. Whoops. You know, you have to know how to spell formula text. There we go. Jeez. There we are. So now that's only one example, but you know, instead of doing this by way of a VLOOKUP with an external table, choose has everything within it. But you always have to work with data where you've got low order numbers. You can only have 31 entries out here too, I think it is. But they have to be somehow converted in or deal with only lower numbers. In other words, the numbers, you know, from 0 upward, that sort of thing.
Now, I'll show, if everyone has a minute, I'll show one of my favorite uses of it. Let me just get it ready for you.
Okay.
So I'm gonna. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Switch it back to
Oh yes, that's fine. That's fine.
And this may be a little bit more. I know that we talked about doing array formulas next, so this may, you know, this to maybe whet one's appetite if we do array formulas at a certain point. So here I have a series, and hopefully everyone can see me. I have a series of people, and I have these KPIs with some numbers I've made up at random. What I've done is I've gone through, and you can see if I select this right here, I've given each of these a name. So KPI A, KPI B, C. So one thing I like to do is, let's say I'm interested in returning the results for KPI B. So here I'm just going to write KPI B, and here I'm going to write match, right? So I'm going to say just write match index just to keep a label here. So here I'll say match, and I want to match the KPI B in here. So we're dealing with exact matches. So what that means is that is at the second column, and I think everyone understands that so far. So in my response, I can say choose, and then my match is going to be my index number, and then here I can just return these different columns I'm interested in, and because I've given them a name, it's a little easier to read. So I'm a big fan of these named ranges. And this is what I was saying, that choose can return a range, because
Oh yeah, yeah.
I can drag this down here, and then if I click up here and hit Control-Shift-Enter, you can see that it's actually returned these values that were given by 2. So one cool thing you can do with this, if you are so inclined, is of course you can actually sort of make a dynamic chart out of it. And then we can do that at another time, but obviously if I type in KPIC here, it changes automatically because it's pulling from this response. So this is why I love it. So that's my
and it's part of that general cluster or a general grouping of functions that we refer to as lookup functions. VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, match and index, choose. Yeah, they all have a complementary role to play.
Yep.
I don't use choose nearly as often as you do, perhaps, but it has its uses from time to time. I think that's a good example of it too. I like that.
you know, the funny thing is everything you can do with choose, you can do with index. You can do, I mean, everything you can do with VLOOKUP, you can do with an index match. So my idea is, you know, what is going to be readable for me later? And this I found is a very, very readable. I know what's going on. So that's just a thought. So I think we are going to need to wrap up here soon. So I appreciate everyone who's attended, and what we're going to do is once this webinar has been edited, we will post it up on VBA Express and we'll send it to you. The best way to get up on the new stuff on VBA Express, so if you want to be alerted of when we post this, you can go to VBAExpress.com and sign up to the newsletter if you haven't already done that. You can also check out the VBAExpress.com blog, which this will be posted, and then there's, of course, the different social media where you can find it. And I think that's it, so I appreciate everyone for coming in and staying with us through some of the technical difficulties, and also for this extracurricular after part. And thank you very much to Dennis, who I know enjoys teaching others. So thank you for coming and learning, and we will see you next time. We will let you know when the next time is. So I don't think we have a date on the calendar just yet. Any farewell comments, Dennis?
I thank everybody for watching, and again, I think VLOOKUP is, just keep an eye on it. It's going to be really important if it's not already important to you, but it's a really powerful tool, and it's the one you'll probably be using most often, but it's the tool that we need as we gather data these days from so many different sources and trying to match it. That's going to be the key one.
Okay, great. Well, everyone have a good one. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you.